The Trial, Franz Kafka, Part 2. Chapter 3. In the empty courtroom, the student, the offices. Every day over the following week, Kay expected another summons to arrive. He could not believe that his rejection of any more hearings had been taken literally, and when the expected summons really had not come by Saturday evening, he took it to mean that he was expected, without being told, to appear at the same place at the same time. So on Sunday he set out once more in the same direction, going without hesitation up the steps and through the corridors. Some of the people remembered him and greeted him from their doorways, but he no longer needed to ask anyone the way, and soon arrived at the right door. It was opened as soon as he knocked about, and, paying no attention to the woman he had seen last time, who was standing at the doorway, he was about to go straight into the adjoining room when she said to him, "There's no session today." "What do you mean, no session?" he asked, unable to believe it, but the woman persuaded him by opening the door to the next room. It was indeed empty, and looked even more dismal empty than it had the previous Sunday. On the podium stood the table as it had been before, with a few books laying on it. "Can I have a look at those books?" asked Kay, not because he was especially curious, but so that he would not have come for nothing. "No," said the woman, as she recrossed the door, "that's not allowed. Those books belong to the examining judge." "I see," said Kay, and nodded. "Those books must be law books. And that's how this court does things. Not only to try people who are innocent, but even to try them without letting them know what's going on." "I expect you're right," said the woman, who had not understood exactly what he meant. "I'd better go away again, then," said Kay. "Should I give a message to the examining judge?" asked the woman. "Do you know him, then?" asked Kay. "Of course I know him," said the woman. "My husband is the court usher." It was only now that Kay noticed that the room, which before had held nothing but a washtub, had been fitted out as a living room. The woman saw how surprised he was, and said, "Yes, we're allowed to live here as we like, only we have to clear the room out when the court's in session. There's lots of disadvantages to my husband's job." "It's not so much the room that surprises me," said Kay, looking at her crossly. "It's your being married that shocks me." "Are you thinking about what happened last time the court was in session, when I disturbed what you were saying?" asked the woman. "Of course," said Kay. "It's in the past now, and I've nearly forgotten about it. But at the time it made me furious, and now you tell me yourself that you are a married woman. It wasn't any disadvantage for you to have your speech interrupted. The way they talk about you after you'd gone was really bad." "They could well be," said Kay, turning away, "but it does not excuse you." "There's no one I know who'd hold it against me," said the woman. "Him who put his arms around me. He's been chasing after me for a long time. I might not be very attractive for some people, but I am for him. I've got no protection from him. Even my husband has had to get used to it. If he wants to keep his job, he's got to put up with it, as that man's a student, and he'll almost certainly be very powerful later on. He's always after me. He'd only just left when you arrived." "That fits in with everything else," said Kay. "I'm not surprised." "Do you want to make things a bit better here?" the woman asked slowly, watching him as if she were saying something that could be as dangerous for Kay as for herself. That's what I thought when I heard you speak. I really liked what you said. Mind you, I only heard part of it. I missed the beginning of it, and at the end I was lying on the floor with the student. It's so horrible here, she said, after a pause, and took hold of Kay's hand. Do you believe you really will be able to make things better? Kay said, and twisted his hand round a little in her soft hands. It's really not my job to make things better here, as you put it, he said. And if you said that to the examining judge, he would laugh at you or punish you for it. I really would not have become involved in this matter if I could have helped it, and I would have lost no sleep worrying about how this court needs to be made better. But because I'm told that I have been arrested and I am under arrest, it forces me to take some action and to do so for my own sake. However, if I can be of more service to you in the process, I will, of course, be glad to do so, and I will be glad to do so not only for the sake of charity, but also because you can be of some help to me. How could I help you then? Said the woman. You could, for example, show me the books on the table there. Yes, certainly, the woman cried, and pulled Kay along behind her as she rushed to them. The books were old and well worn. The cover of one of them had nearly broken through in its middle, and it was held together with a few threads. Everything is so dirty here, said Kay, shaking his head, and before he could pick the books up, the woman wiped some of the dust off with her apron. Kay took hold of the book that lay on top and threw it open. An indecent picture appeared. A man and a woman sat naked on a sofa. The base intent of whoever drew it was easy to see, but he had been so grossly lacking in skill that all that anyone could really make out were the man and the woman who dominated the picture with their bodies sitting in overly upright postures that created a false perspective and made it difficult for them to approach each other. Kay didn't thumb through the book any more, but just threw open the next one. At its title page it was a novel with the title What Gret Suffered from Her Husband Hans. So this is the book of law book they study here, said Kay. This is the sort of person sitting in judgment over me. I can help you, said the woman. Would you like me to? Could you really do that without placing yourself in danger? You did so say earlier on that your husband is wholly dependent on his superiors. I still want to help you, said the woman. Come over here. We've got to talk about it. Don't say any more about what danger I'm in. I only fear danger where I want to fear it. Come on over here. She pointed to the podium and invited him to sit down on the step with her. You've got lovely dark eyes, she said, after that, after they had sat down, looking up into Kay's face. People say I've got nice eyes too, but yours are much nicer. It was the first thing I noticed when you came here. That's even why I came in here, into the assembly room afterwards. I'd never normally do that. I'm not really even allowed to. So that's what all this is about, thought Kay. She's offering herself to me. She's as degenerate as everything else around here. She's had enough of the court officials, which is understandable, I suppose, and so she approaches any stranger and makes compliments about his eyes. With that, Kay stood up in silence, as if he had spoken his thoughts out loud and thus explained his actions to the woman. I don't think you can be of any assistance to me, he said. To be of any real assistance, you would need to be in contact with high officials. But I'm sure You only know the lower employees, and there are crowds of them milling about here. I'm sure you're very familiar with them and could achieve a great deal through them. I've no doubt of that, but the most that could be done through them would have no bearing at all on the final outcome of the trial. You, on the other hand, would lose some of your friends as a result, and I have no wish of that. Carry on with these people in the same way as you have been, as it doesn't does seem to me to be something you cannot do without. I have no regrets in saying this, as, in return for your compliment to me, I also find you rather attractive, especially when you look at me as sadly as you are now. Although you really have no reason to do so, you belong to the people I have to combat, and very comfortable among them. You're even in love with the student, or if you don't love him, you do at least prefer him to your husband. It's easy to see that from what you've been saying. No, she shouted, remained sitting where she was and grasped Kay's hand, which he failed to pull away from fast enough. You can't go away now. You can't go away when you've misjudged me like that. Are you really capable of going away now? Am I really so worthless that you won't even do me the favor of staying a little bit longer? You misunderstand me, said Kay, sitting back down. If it's really important to you for me to stay here, then I'll be glad to do so. I have plenty of time. I came here thinking there would be a trial taking place. All I meant with that, with what I said just now, was to ask you not to do anything on my behalf in the proceedings against me. But even that is nothing for you to worry about when you consider that there's nothing hanging on the outcome of this trial, and that whatever the verdict, I will just laugh at it, and that's even presupposing it ever even reaches any conclusion, which I very much doubt. I think it's much more likely that the court officials will be too lazy, too forgetful, or even too fearful even to continue with these proceedings, and that they will soon be abandoned if they haven't been abandoned already. It's even possible that they will pretend to be carrying on with the trial in the hope of receiving a large bribe, although I can tell you now that that will be quite in vain, as I pay bribes to no one. Perhaps one favor you could do me would be to tell the examining judge or anyone else who likes to spread important news that I will never be induced to pay any sort of bribe through any stratagem of theirs. And I'm sure that they have many stratagems at their disposal. This is no prospect of that. You can tell that quite openly. And once more, I expect they have already noticed themselves, or even if they haven't, this affair is really not so important to me as they think. Those gentlemen who would only save some work for themselves, or at least some unpleasantness for me, which, however, I am glad to endure if I know that each piece of unpleasantness for me is a blow against me, and I will make quite sure it is a blow against them. Do you actually know the judge? Course I do, said the woman. He was the first one I thought of when I offered to help you. I didn't know he's only a minor official, but if you say so, it must be true. Mind you, I still think the report he gives to his superiors must have some influence. And he writes so many reports. You see, these officials are lazy, but they're certainly not all lazy, especially this examining judge. He writes ever such a lot. Last Sunday, for instance, that session went on until the evening. Everyone had gone but the examining judge. He stayed in the hall. I had to bring him a lamp and all. All I had was a little kitchen lamp, but he was very satisfied with it, and started to write straight away. Meantime my husband arrived. He always has the day off on Sunday. We got the furniture back in and got our room sorted out, and then a few of the neighbors came. We sat and talked for a bit by a candle. In short, we forgot oil about the examining judge and went to bed. All of the sudden in the night, it must have been quite late in the night, I wakes up next to the bed. There's the examining judge, shading the lamp with his hand so that there's no light from it falls on my husband. He didn't need to be as careful as that. The way my husband sleeps the night light wouldn't have woken him up anyway. I was quite shocked and nearly screamed, but the judge was very friendly. Warned me I should be careful. He whispered to me he's been writing all this time, and now he's brought me the lamp back, and he'll never forget how I looked when he found me there asleep. What I mean with all this, I just wanted to tell you how the examining judge really does write lots of reports, especially about you, as questioning you was definitely one of the main things on the agenda that Sunday. If he writes reports as long as they must be of some importance, and besides all that, you can see from the happened that the examining judge is after me, and it's right now, when he's first begun to notice me, that I can have a lot of influence on him. And I've got other proof, I mean a lot to him too. Yesterday he sent that student to me, the one he really trusts and who he works with. He sent him with a present for me, silk stockings. He said it was because I clear up in the courtroom, but that's only a pretense. That job's no more than what I'm supposed to do. It's what my husband gets paid for. Nice stockings they are, look. She stretched out her leg, drew her skirt up to her knee, and looked herself at the stocking. They are nice stockings, but they're too good for me, really. She suddenly interrupted herself and laid her hand on Kay's, as if she wanted to calm him down, and whispered, "Be quiet, Berthold is watching us." Kay slowly looked up. In the doorway to the courtroom stood a young man. He was short, his legs were not quite straight, and he continually moved his fingers round in a short, thin red beard, with which he hoped to make himself look dignified. Kay looked at him with some curiosity. He was the first student he had ever met of the unfamiliar discipline of jurisprudence, face to face at least, a man who would even most likely attain high office one day. The student, in contrast, seemed to take no notice of Kay at all. He merely withdrew his fingers from his beard long enough to beckon to the woman, and went over to the window. The woman leant over to Kay and whispered, "Don't be cross with me. Please don't. And please don't think ill of me either. I've got to go to him now. To this horrible man. Just look at his bent legs. But I'll come straight back, and then I'll go with you if you'll take me. I'll go wherever you want. You can do whatever you like with me. I'll be happy if I can be away from here for as long as possible. It'd be best if I could get away from here for good." She stroked Kay's hand once more, jumped up, and ran over to the window. Before he realized it, Kay grasped for her hand, but failed to catch it. He really was attracted to the woman, and even after thinking hard about it, could find no good reason why he should not give in to her allure. It briefly crossed his mind that the woman meant to entrap him on behalf of the court, but that was an objection he had no difficulty in fending off. In what way could she entrap him? Was he not still free, so that he could crush the entire court whenever he wanted? at least where it concerned him. Could he not have that much confidence in himself? And her offer to help sounded sincere, and maybe it wasn't quite worthless. Maybe there was no better revenge against the examining judge and his cronies than to take this woman from him and have her for himself. Maybe then, after much hard work writing dishonest reports about Kay, the judge would go to the woman's bed late one night and find it empty. And it would be empty because she belonged to Kay. Because this woman at the window, this lush, supple, warm body in its somber clothes of rough, heavy material belonged to him, totally to him, and to him alone. Once he had settled his thoughts towards the woman in this way, he began to find the quiet conversation at the window was taking too long. He rapped on the podium with his knuckles, and then even with his fist. The student briefly looked away from the woman to glance at Kay over his shoulder, but did allow himself to be disturbed. In fact, he even pressed himself close to the woman and put his arms around her. She dropped her head down low, as if listening to him carefully. As she did so, he kissed her right on the neck, hardly even interrupting what he was saying. Kay saw this as a confirmation of the tyranny the student held over the woman, and which she had already complained about. He stood up and walked up and down the room, glancing sideways at the student. He wondered what would be the quickest possible way to get rid of him, and so it was not unwelcome to him when the student, clearly disturbed by Kay's toing and froing, which Kay had now developed into a stamping up and down, said to him, "You don't have to stay here, you know, if you're getting impatient. You could have gone earlier. No one would have missed you. In fact, you should have gone. You should have left as quickly as possible as soon as I got here." This comment could have caused all possible rage to break out between them, but Kay also bore in mind that this was a prospective court official speaking to a disfavored defendant, and he might as well have been taking pride in speaking in this way. Kay remained standing quite close to him, and said with a smile, "You're quite right. I am impatient, but the easiest way to settle this impatience would be if you left us. On the other hand, if you've come here to study, you are a student, I hear, I'll be quite happy to leave the room to you and go away with the woman. I'm sure you'll still have a lot to study to do before you've made it into a judge. It's true that I'm still not all that familiar with your branch of jurisprudence, but I take it it involves a lot more than speaking roughly, and I see you have no shame in doing that extremely well." "He shouldn't have been allowed to move about so freely," said the student, as if he wanted to give the woman an explanation for Kay's insults. "That was a mistake. I've told the examining judge so. He should at least have been detained in his room between hearings. Sometimes it's impossible to understand what the judge thinks he's doing." "You're wasting your breath," said Kay. Then he reached his hand out towards the woman and said, "Come with me." "So that's it," said the student. "Oh no, you're not going to get her." And with a strength you would not have expected from him, he glanced tenderly at her, lifted her up on one arm, and his back bit under the weight, ran with her to the door. In this way he showed unmistakably that he was to some extent afraid of Kay, but he none the less dared to provoke him still further by stroking and squeezing the woman's arm with his free hand. Kay ran the few steps up to him, but when he had reached him and was about to take hold of him and, if necessary, throttle him, the woman said, "It's no good. It's the examining judge. Who sent for me? I daren't go with you. This little bastard," and here she ran her hand over the student's face, "this little bastard won't let me go." "And you don't want to be set free," shouted Kay, laying his hand on the student's shoulder, who then snapped at it with his teeth. "No," shouted the woman, pushing Kay away with both hands. "No, no, don't do that. What'd you think you were doing? That'd be the end of me. Let go of him. Please just let go of him. He's only carrying out the George's orders. He's carrying me to him." "Let him take you, then. Then I want to see nothing more of you," said Kay, enraged by his disappointment, and giving the student a thump in the back, so that he briefly stumbled, and then, glad that he had not fallen, immediately jumped up all the higher with his burden. Kay followed them slowly. He realized that this was the first unambiguous setback he had suffered from these people. It was, of course, nothing to worry about. He accepted the setback only because he was looking for a fight. If he stayed at home and carried on with his normal life, he would be 1,000 times superior to these people, and could get any of them out of his way just with a kick. And he imagined the most laughable scene possible as an example of this, if this contemptible student, this inflated child, this knock-kneed Redbeard, if he were kneeling at Elsa's bed, wringing his hands and begging for forgiveness. Kay so enjoyed imagining this scene that he decided to take the student along to Elsa with him, if ever he should get the opportunity. Kate was curious to see where the woman would be taken, and he hurried over to the door. The student was not likely to carry her through the streets on his arm. It turned out that the journey was far shorter. Directly opposite the flat there was a narrow flight of wooden steps which probably led up to the attic. They turned as they went, so that it was not possible to see where they ended. The student carried the woman up the steps, and after the exertions of running with her, he was soon groaning and moving very slowly. The woman waved down at Kay, and by raising and lowering her shoulders she tried to show that she was an innocent party in this abduction, although the gesture did not show a lot of regret. Kay watched her with an expression like a stranger. He wanted to show neither that he was disappointed nor that he would easily get over his disappointment. The two of them had disappeared, but Kay remained standing in the doorway. He had to accept that the woman had not only cheated him, but that she had also lied to him when she said she was being taken to the examining judge. The examining judge certainly wouldn't be sitting and waiting in the attic. The wooden stairs would explain nothing to him, however long he stared at them. Then Kay noticed a small piece of paper next to them, went across to it and read, in a childish and unpracticed hand, "Entrance to the court offices." Were the court offices here, in the attic of this tenement, then? If that was how they were accommodated, it did not attract much respect, and it was some comfort for the accused to realize how little money this court had at its disposal if it had to locate its offices in a place where the tenants of the building, who were themselves among the poorest of people, would throw their unneeded junk. On the other hand, it was possible that the officials had enough money, but that they squandered it on themselves rather than use it for the court's purposes. Going by Kay's experience of them so far, that even seemed probable, except that if the court were allowed to decay in that way, it would not just humiliate the accused, but also give him more encouragement than if the court were simply in a state of poverty. Kay also now understood that the court was ashamed to summon those it accused to the attic of this building for the initial hearing, and why it preferred to impose upon them in their own homes. What a position it was that Kay found himself in. Compared with the judge sitting up in the attic, Kay at the bank had a big office with a anteroom and had an enormous window through which he could look down at the activity in the square. It was true, though, that he had no secondary income from bribes and fraud, and he couldn't tell a servant to bring him a woman up to the office on his arm. Kay, however, was quite willing to do without such things, in this life at least. Kay was still looking at the notice when a man came up the stairs looking through the open door into the living room, where it was also possible to see the courtroom, and finally asked Kay whether he had just seen a woman there. "You're the court usher, aren't you?" asked Kay. "That's right," said the man. "Oh, yes, you're Defendant K. I recognize you now as well. Nice to see you here." And he offered Kay his hand, which was far from what Kay had expected, and when Kay said nothing, he added, "There's no court session planned for today, though." "I know that," said Kay, as he looked at the usher's civilian coat, which, beside its ordinary buttons, displayed two gilded ones as the only sign of his office, and seemed to have been taken from an old army officer's coat. "I was speaking with your wife a little while ago. She is no longer here. The student has carried her off to the examining judge." "Listen to this," said the usher. "They're always carrying her away from me. It's Sunday today, and it's not part of my job to do any work today, but they send me off with some message, which isn't even necessary, just to get me away from her. What they do is they send me off not too far away, so that I can still hope to get back on time if I really hurry. So off I go running as fast as I can, shout the message through the crack in the door of the office I've been sent to, so out of breath they hardly be able to understand it, run back here again, but the student's been even faster than I have. Well, he's got less far to go. He's only got to run down the steps. If I wasn't so dependent on them, I'd have squashed the student against the wall here a long time ago. Right here, next to the sign. I'm always dreaming of doing that. Just here, just above the floor, that's where he's crushed onto the wall, his arms stretched out, his fingers spread apart, his crooked legs twisted round into a circle, and blood squirted all out, all around him. It's only ever been a dream so far, though." "Is there nothing else you do?" asked Kay, with a smile. "Nothing that I know of," said the usher. "And it's going to get even worse now. Up till now he's only been carrying her off for himself. Now he started carrying her off for the judge and all, just like I'd always said he would." "Does your wife, then, not share some of the responsibility?" asked Kay. He had to force himself as he asked this question, as he, too, felt so jealous now. "Course she does," said the usher. "It's more her fault than theirs. It was her who attracted herself to him. All he did, he just chases after any woman. There's 5 flats in this block alone where he's been thrown out, after working his way in there. And my wife is the best looking woman in the whole building, but it's me who's not even allowed to defend himself." "If that's how things are, then there's nothing that can be done," said Kay. "Well, why not?" asked the usher. "He's a coward, that student. If he wants to lay a finger on my wife, all you'd have to do is give him such a good hiding he'd never dare do it again. But I'm not allowed to do that, and nobody else is going to do me the favor, as they're all afraid of his power. The only one Who could do it is a man like you. What? How could I do it? Asked Kay in astonishment. Well, you're facing a charge, aren't you? Said the usher. Yes, but that's all the more reason for me to be afraid. Even if he had no influence on the outcome of the trial, he probably has some on the initial examination. Yes, exactly, said the usher, as if Kay's view had been just as correct as his own, only we don't usually get any trials heard here with no hope at all. I am not of the same opinion, said Kay, although that ought not to prevent me from dealing with the student if the opportunity arises. I would be very grateful to you, said the usher of the court, somewhat formally, not really seeming to believe that his highest wish could be fulfilled. Perhaps, continued Kay, perhaps there are some other officials of yours here, perhaps all of them, who would deserve the same. Oh, yes, yes, said the usher, as if this was a matter of course. Then he looked at Kay trustingly, which, despite all his friendliness, he had not done until then, and added, they're always rebelling. But the conversation seemed to have become a little uncomfortable for him, as he broke it off by saying, now I have to report to the office. Would you like to come with me? There's nothing for me to do there, said Kay. You'd be able to have a look at it. No one will take any notice of you. Is it worth seeing then? Asked Kay, hesitatingly, although he felt very keen to go with him. Well, said the usher, I thought you'd be interested in it. All right then, said Kay. Finally, I'll come with you. And quicker than the usher himself, he ran up the steps. At the entrance he nearly fell over, as behind the door there was another step. They don't show much concern for the public, he said. They don't show any concern at all, said the usher. Just look at the waiting room here. It consisted of a long corridor for which roughly made doors led out to the separate apartments of the attic. There was no direct source of light, but it was not entirely dark, as many of the apartments, instead of solid walls, had just wooden bars reaching up to the ceiling to separate them from the corridor. The light made its way in through them, and it was also possible to see individual officials through them as they sat writing at their desks, or stood at the wooden framework and watched the people on the corridor through the gaps. There were only a few people in the corridor, probably because it was Sunday. They were not very impressive. They sat equally spaced on two rows of long wooden benches, which had been placed along both sides of the corridor. All of them were carelessly dressed, although the expressions on their faces, their bearing, the style of their beards, and many details which were hard to identify, showed that they belonged to the upper classes. There were no coat hooks for them to use, and so they had placed their hats under the bench, each probably having followed the example of the others. When those who were sitting nearest the door saw Kay and the usher of the court, they stood up to greet them. And when the others saw that, they also thought they had to greet them, so that as the two of them went by, all the people there stood up. None of them stood properly upright. Their backs were bowed, their knees bent. They stood like beggars on the street. Kay waited for the usher, who was following just behind him. They must all be very dispirited, he said. Yes, said the usher. They are the accused. Everyone you see here has been accused. Really? Said Kay. They're colleagues of mine, then. And he turned to the nearest one, a tall, thin man, with hair that was nearly gray. What is it you are waiting for here? Asked Kay, politely. But the man was startled at being spoken to unexpectedly, which was all the more pitiful to see because the man clearly had some experience of the world, and elsewhere would certainly have been able to show his superiority and would not have easily given up the advantage he had acquired. Here, though, he did not know what answer to give to such a simple question, and looked round at the others as if they were under some obligation to help him, and as if no one could expect any answer from him without this help. Then the usher of the court stepped forward to him, and in order to calm him down and raise his spirits, said, "The gentleman here only asks what it is you're waiting for. You can give him an answer." The voice of the usher was probably familiar to him, and had a better effect than Kay's. "I'm I'm waiting," he began, and then came to a halt. He had clearly chosen this beginning so that he could give a precise answer to the question, but now he didn't know how to continue. Some of the others waiting had come closer and stood round the group. The usher of the court said to them, "Get out the way, keep the gangway free." They moved back slightly, but not as far as where they had been standing before. In the meantime, the man whom Kay had first approached had pulled himself together and even answered him with a smile. "A month ago I made some applications for evidence to be heard in my case, and I'm waiting for it to be settled." "You certainly seem to be going to a lot of effort," said Kay. "Yes," said the man, "it is my affair after all." "Not everyone thinks the same way as you do," said Kay. "I've been indicted as well, but I swear on my soul that I've neither submitted evidence nor done anything else of the sort." "Do you really think that's necessary?" "I don't really know exactly," said the man, once more totally unsure of himself. He clearly thought Kay was joking with him, and therefore probably thought it best to repeat his early answer in order to avoid making any new mistakes. With Kay looking at him impatiently, he just said, "As far as I'm concerned, I've applied to have this evidence heard." "Perhaps you don't believe I've been indicted?" asked Kay. "Oh, please, I certainly do," said the man, stepping slightly to one side, but there was more anxiety in his answer than belief. "You don't believe me, then?" asked Kay, and took hold of his arm, unconsciously prompted by the man's humble demeanor, as if he wanted to force him to believe him. But he did not want to hurt the man, and had only taken hold of him very lightly. None the less the man cried out, as if Kay had grasped him not with two fingers, but with red hot tongs. Shouting in this ridiculous way finally made Kay tired of him. If he didn't believe he was indicted, then so much the better. Maybe he even thought Kay was a judge. And before leaving he held him a lot harder, shoved him back onto the bench, and walked on. "These defendants are so sensitive, most of them," said the usher of the court. Almost all of those who had been waiting had now assembled around the man, who by now had stopped shouting, and they seemed to be asking him lots of precise questions about the incident. Kay was approached by a security guard, identifiably mainly by his sword, of which the scabbard seemed to be made of aluminum. This greatly surprised Kay, and he reached out for it with his hand. The guard had come because of the shouting, and asked what had been happening. The usher of the court said a few words to try and calm him down, but the guard explained that he had to look into it himself, saluted, and hurried on, walking with very short steps, probably because of gout. Kay didn't concern himself long with the guard of these people, especially as he saw a turning off the corridor about halfway along it on the right hand side where there was no door to stop him going that way. He asked the usher whether that was the right way to go. The usher nodded, and that is the way that Kay went. The usher remained always one or two steps behind Kay, which he found irritating, as in a place like this it could give the impression that he was being driven along by someone who had arrested him. So he frequently waited for the usher to catch up, but the usher always remained behind him in order to put an end to his discomfort. Kay finally said, "Now that I've seen what it looks like here, I'd like to go." "You haven't seen everything yet," said the usher, ingenuously. "I don't want to see everything," said Kay, who was also feeling very tired. "I want to go. What is the way to the exit?" "You haven't got lost, have you?" asked the usher in amazement. "You go down this way to the corner, then right down the corridor straight ahead as far as the door." "Come with me," said Kay. "Show me the way. I'll miss it. There's so many different ways here." "It's the only way there is," said the usher, who had now started to sound quite reproachful. "I can't go back with you again. I've got to hand in my report, and I've already lost a lot of time because of you, as it is." "Come with me," Kay repeated, now somewhat sharper, as if he had finally caught the usher out in a lie. "Don't shout like that," whispered the usher. "There's offices all around us here. If you don't want to go back by yourself, come on a bit further with me, or else wait till I've sorted out my report. Then I'll be glad to go back with you again." "No, no," said Kay. "I will not wait. You must come with me now." Kay had still looked round at anything at all in the room where he found himself, and it was only when one of the many wooden doors all around him opened that he noticed it. A young woman, probably summoned by the loudness of Kay's voice, entered and asked, "What is it the gentleman wants?" In the darkness behind her there was also a man approaching. Kay looked at the usher. He had, after all, said that no one would take any notice of Kay, and now there were two people coming. It only needed a few, and everyone in the office would become aware of him, asking for explanations as to why he was there. It, the only understandable and acceptable thing to say was that he was accused of something, and wanted to know the date of his next hearing, but this was an explanation he did not want to give, especially as it was not true. He had only come out of curiosity, or else an explanation even less usable. He could say that he wanted to ascertain that the court was as revolting on the inside as it was on the outside, and it did not seem that he had been quite right in this supposition. He had no wish to intrude any deeper. He was disturbed enough by what he had seen already. He was not in the right frame of mind just then to face a high official, such as might appear from behind any door, and he wanted to go, either with the usher of the court, or if needs be, alone. But he must have seemed very odd standing there in silence, and the young woman and the usher were indeed looking at him as if they thought he would go through some major metamorphosis any second, which they didn't want to miss seeing. And in the doorway stood the man whom Kay had noticed in the background earlier. He held firmly on to the beam above the low door, swinging a little on the tips of his feet, as if becoming impatient as he watched. But the young woman was the first to recognize that Kay's behavior was caused by his feeling slightly unwell. She brought a chair and asked, "Would you like to sit down?" Kay sat down immediately, and in order to keep his place better, put his elbows on the armrest. You're a little bit dizzy, aren't you?" she asked him. Her face was now close in front of him. It bore the severe expression that many young women have just when they're in the bloom of their youth. "It's nothing for you to worry about," she said. "That's nothing unusual here. Almost everyone gets an attack like that the first time they come here. This is your first time, is it? Yes, it's nothing unusual then. The sun burns down on the roof, and the hot wood makes the air so thick and heavy. It makes this place rather unsuitable for offices, whatever other advantages it might offer, but the air is almost impossible to breathe on days when there's a lot of business, and that's almost every day. And when you think that there's a lot of washing put out to dry here as well, and we can't stop the tenants doing that, it's not surprising you started to feel unwell. But you get used to the air all right in the end. When you're here for the second or third time, you'll hardly notice how oppressive the air is. Are you feeling any better now?" Kay made no answer. He felt too embarrassed at being put at the mercy of these people by his sudden weakness, and learning the reason for feeling ill made him feel not better, but a little worse. The girl noticed it straight away, and to make the air feel fresher for Kay, she took a window pole that was leaning against the wall and pushed open a small hatch directly above Kay's head that led to the outside. But so much soot fell in that the girl had to immediately close the hatch again and clean the soot off Kay's hands with her handkerchief, as Kay was too tired to do that for himself. He would have liked just to sit quietly where he was until he had enough strength to leave, and the less fuss people made about him, the sooner that would be. But then the girl said, "You can't stay here. We're in people's way here." Kay looked at her as if to ask whose way they were impeding. "If you like, I can take you to sit in the sick room," and turning to the man in the doorway said, "Please help me." The man immediately came over to them, but Kay did not want to go to the sick room. That was just what he wanted to avoid, being led further from place to place. The further he went, the more difficult it must become. So he said, "I am able to walk now," and stood up, shaking after becoming used to sitting so comfortably. But then he was unable to stay upright. "I can't manage it," he said, shaking his head, and sat down again with a sigh. He remembered the usher, who, despite everything, would have been able to lead him out of there, but who seemed to have gone long before Kay looked out between the man and the young woman who were standing in front of him, but was unable to find the usher. "I think," said the man, who was elegantly dressed and whose appearance was made especially impressive with a gray waistcoat that had two long, sharply tailored points, "the gentleman is feeling unwell because of the atmosphere here. So the best thing, and what he would most prefer, would be not to take him to the sick room, but to get him out of the offices altogether." "That's right!" exclaimed Kay, with such joy that he nearly interrupted what the man was saying. "I'm sure that'll make me feel better straight away. I'm really not that weak. All I need is a little support under my arms. I won't cause you much trouble. It's not such a long way anyway. Lead me to the door, and then I'll sit on the stairs for a while, and soon recover, as I don't suffer from attacks like this at all. I'm surprised at it myself. I also work in an office, and I'm quite used to this office air. But here it seems to be too strong. You've said so yourselves. So please be so kind as to help me on my way a little. I'm feeling dizzy, you see, and it'll make me ill if I stand up by myself." And with that he raised his shoulders to make it easier for the two of them to take him by the arms. The man however, didn't follow his suggestions, but just stood there with his hands in his trousers and laughed out loud. "There, you see," he said to the girl, "I was quite right. The gentleman is only unwell here, and not in general." The young woman smiled too, but lightly tapped the man's arm with the tips of her fingers as if he had allowed himself too much fun with Kay. "So what do you think, then?" said the man, still laughing. "I really do want to lead the gentleman out of here." "That's all right, then," said the girl, briefly inclining her charming head. "Don't worry too much about him laughing," said the girl to Kay, who had become unhappy once more, stared quietly in front of himself as if needing no further explanation. "This gentleman, may I introduce you?" The man gave his permission with a wave of the hand. "So this gentleman's job is to give out information. He gives all the information they need to people who are waiting. As our court and its offices are not very well known among the public, he gets asked for quite a lot of questions. He has an answer for every question. You can try him out if you feel like it. But that's not his only distinction. His other distinction is his elegance of dress. We, that's to say all of us who work in the offices here, we decided that the information giver would have to be elegantly dressed, as he continually has to deal with the litigants, and he's the first one they met, so he needs to give a dignified impression. The rest of us, I'm afraid, as you can see just by looking at me, dress very badly and odd fashioned, and there's no much point in spending much on clothes anyway, as we hardly ever leave the offices. We even sleep here. But as I said, we decided that the information giver would have to have nice clothes, as the management here is rather peculiar in this respect, and they would get them for us. We had a collection. Some of the little gints contributed to it, too, and brought him these lovely clothes, and some others besides, so everything would be ready for him to give a good impression, except that he spoils it again by laughing and frightening people. "That's how it is," said the man, mocking her. "But I don't understand why it is that you're explaining all of the intimate facts to the gentleman, or rather, why it is that you're impressing them on him, as I'm sure he's not at all interested. Just look at him sitting there. It's clear he's occupied with his own affairs." Kay just did not feel like contradicting him. The girl's intentions may have been good. Perhaps she was under instruction to distract him, or to give him the chance to collect himself. But the attempt had not worked. "I had to explain to him why you were laughing," said the girl. "I suppose it was insulting. I think he would forgive even worse insults if I finally took him outside." Kay said nothing, did not even look up. He tolerated the two of them negotiating over him like an object. That was even what suited him best. But suddenly he felt the information giver's hand on one arm, and the young woman's hand on the other. Up you get then, weakling," said the information giver. "Thank you both very much," said Kay, pleasantly surprised, as he slowly rose and personally guided these unfamiliar hands to the places where he most needed support. As they approached the corridor, the girl said quietly into Kay's ear, "I must seem to think it's very important to show the information giver in a good light, but you shouldn't doubt what I say. I just want to say the truth. He isn't hard-hearted. It's not really his job to help litigants outside if they're unwell, but he's doing it anyway, as you can see. I don't suppose any of us is hard-hearted. Perhaps we'd all like to be helpful, but working for the court offices, it's easiest for us to give the impression we are hard-hearted and don't want to help anyone. It makes me quite sad. Would you not like to sit down here a while?" asked the information giver. They were already in the corridor, just in front of the defendant whom Kay had spoken to earlier. Kay felt almost ashamed to be seen by him. Earlier he had stood so upright in front of him, and now he had to be supported by two others. His hat was held up and the information giver balanced on outstretched fingers. His hair was disheveled and hung down onto the sweat on his forehead, but the defendant seemed to notice nothing of what was going on and just stood there humbly, as if wanting to apologize to the information giver for being there. The information giver looked past him. "I know," he said, "that's my case can't be settled today, not yet, but I've come in anyway. I thought I could wait here anyway. It's Sunday today. I've got plenty of time, and I'm not disturbing anyone here." "There's no need to be so apologetic," said the information giver. "It's really commendable for you to be so attentive. You are taking up space here when you don't need to, but as long as you don't get in my way, I will do nothing to stop you following the progress of your case as closely as you like. When one has seen so many people who shamefully neglect their cases, one learns to show patience with people like you. Do sit down." "He's very good with the litigants," whispered the girl. Kay nodded, but started to move off again when the information giver repeated, "Would you not like to sit down here for a while?" "No," said Kay, "I don't want to rest." He had said that with as decisively as he could, but in fact it would have done him a lot of good to sit down. It was as if he were suffering seasickness. He felt as if he were on a ship in a rough sea, as if the water were hitting against the wooden walls, a thundering from the depths of the corridor, if the torrent were crashing over it, as if the corridor were swaying and the waiting litigants on each side of it rising and sinking. It made the calmness of the girl and the man leading him all the more incomprehensible. He was at their mercy. If they let go of him, he would fall like a board. Their little eyes glanced here and there. Kay could feel the evenness of their steps, but could not do the same, as from step to step he was virtually being carried. He finally noticed they were speaking to him, but he did not understand them. All he heard was a noise that filled all the space, and through which there seemed to be an unchanging higher note sounding like a siren. Louder he whispered with his head sunk low, ashamed at having to ask them to speak louder when he knew that had spoken loudly enough, even if it had been for him incomprehensible. At last a draught of cool air blew in his face, as if a gap had been torn out in the wall in front of him, and next to him he heard someone say, "First he says he wants to go, and then you can tell him 100 times that this is the way out, and he doesn't move." Kay became aware that he was standing in front of the way out, and that the young woman had opened the door. It seemed to him that all his strength returned to him at once, and to get a foretaste of freedom he stepped straight on to one of the stairs and took his leave there of his companions, who bowed to him. "Thank you very much," he repeated, shook their hands once more, and did not let go until he thought he saw that they found it hard to bear the comparatively fresh air from the stairway after being so long used to the air in the offices. They were hardly able to reply, and the young woman might even have fallen over if Kay had not shut the door extremely fast. Kay then stood still for a while, combed his hair with the help of a pocket mirror, picked up his hat from the next stair, the information must have thrown it down there, and then he ran down the steps, so fresh and in such long leaps that the contrast with his previous state nearly frightened him. His normally sturdy state of health had never prepared him for surprises such as this. Did his body want to revolt and cause him a new trial, as he was bearing the old one with such little effort? He did not quite reject the idea that he should see a doctor the next time he had the chance, but whatever he did, and this was something on which he could advise himself, he wanted to spend all Sunday morning in future better than he had spent this one. Chapter 4. Miss Bursner's Friend. For some time after this Kay found it impossible to exchange even just a few words with Miss Bursner. He tried to reach her in many and various ways, but she always found a way to avoid it. He would come straight home from the office, remain in her room without the light on, and sit on the sofa with nothing more to distract him than keeping watch on the empty hallway. If the maid went by and closed the door of the apparently empty room, he would get up after a while and open it again. He got up an hour earlier than usual in the morning, so that he might perhaps find Miss Bursner alone as she went to the office. But none of these efforts brought any success. Then he wrote her a letter, both to the office and the flat, attempting once more to justify his behavior, offered to make whatever amends he could, promised never to cross whatever boundary she might set him, and begged merely to have the chance to speak to her sometime, especially as he was unable to do anything with Mrs. Grubach either until he had spoken with Miss Bushner. He finally informed her that the following Sunday he would stay in his room all day, waiting for a sign from her that there was some hope of his request being fulfilled, or at least that she would explain to him why she could not fulfill it, even though he had promised to observe whatever stipulations she might have. The letters were not returned, but there was no answer either. However, on the following Sunday there was a sign that seemed clear enough. It was still early when Kay noticed through the keyhole that there was an unusual level of activity in the hallway which soon abated. A French teacher, although she was German and called Montag, a pale, febrile girl with a slight limp, who had previously occupied a room of her own, was moving into Miss Bursner's room. She could be seen shuffling through the hallway for several hours. There was always another piece of clothing, or a blanket, or a book that she had forgotten and had to be fetched specially and brought into the new home. When Mrs. Grubach brought Kay his breakfast, ever since the time when she had made Kay so cross, she didn't trust the maid to do the slightest job. He had no choice but to speak to her, for the first time in 5 days. "Why is there so much noise in the hallway today?" he asked as she poured his coffee out. "Can't something be done about it? Does this clearing out have to be done on a Sunday?" Kay did not look up at Mrs. Grubach, but he saw none the less that she seemed to feel some relief as she breathed in. Even sharp questions like this from Mr. K she perceived as forgiveness, or as the beginning of forgiveness. "We're not clearing anything out, Mr. K," she said. "It's just that Miss Montague is moving in with Miss Bursner and is moving her things across." She said nothing, but just waited to see how Kay would take it and whether he would allow her to carry on speaking. But Kay kept in uncertainty, took the spoon and pensively stirred his coffee while he remained silent. Then he looked up at her and said, "What about the suspicions you had earlier about Miss Bursner? Have you given them up?" "Mr. K," called Mrs. Grubach, who had been waiting for his very question, as she put her hands together and held them out towards him. "I just made a chance remark, and you took it so badly. I didn't have the slightest intention of offending anyone, not you or anyone else. You've known me a long time, long enough, Mr. K. I'm sure you're convinced of that. You don't know how I've been suffering for the past few days that I should tell lies about my tenants. And you, Mr. K., you believed it, and said I should give you notice, give you notice." At this last outcry, Mrs. Grubach was already choking back her tears. She raised her apron to her face and blubbered out loud. "Oh, don't cry, Mrs. Grubach," said Kay, looking out the window. He was thinking only of Miss Bursner and how she was accepting an unknown girl into her room. "Now don't cry," he said again, as he turned his look back into the room where Mrs. Grubach was still crying. "I meant no harm either when I said that. It was simply a misunderstanding between us that can happen even between old friends sometimes." Mrs. Grubach pulled her apron down to below her eyes to see whether Kay really was attempting a reconciliation. "Well, yes, that's how it is," said Kay, and as Mrs. Grubach's behavior indicated that the captain had said nothing, he dared to add, "Do you really think, then, that I'd want to make an enemy of you for the sake of a girl we hardly know?" "Yes, you're quite right, Mr. K," said Mrs. Grubach, and then, to her misfortune, as soon as she felt just a little freer to speak, she added something rather inept. "I kept asking myself why it was that Mr. K took such an interest in Miss Bursner. Why does he quarrel with me over her when he knows that any cross word from him and I can't sleep that night? And I didn't say anything about Miss Bursner that I hadn't seen with my own eyes." Kay said nothing in reply. He should have chased her from the room as soon as she opened her mouth, and he didn't want to do that. He contented himself with merely drinking his coffee and let Mrs. Grubach feel that she was superfluous. Outside, the dragging steps of Miss Montague could still be heard as she went from one side of the hallway to the other. "Do you hear that?" asked Kay, pointing his hand at the door. "Yes," said Mrs. Grubach with a sigh. "I wanted to give her some help, and I wanted the maid to help her too, but she's stubborn. She wants to move everything in herself. I wonder at Miss Bursner. I often feel it's a burden for me to have Miss Montague as a tenant, but Miss Bursner accepts her into her room with herself." "There's nothing there for you to worry about," said Kay, crushing the remains of a sugar lump in his cup. "Does she cause you any trouble?" "No," said Mrs. Grubach. "In itself, it's very good to have her here. There, it makes another room free for me, and I can't let my nephew, the captain, occupy it. I began to worry he might be disturbing you when I had to let him live in the living room next to you over the last few days. He's not very considerate." "What an idea," said Kay, standing up. "There's no question of that. You seem to think that because I can't stand this toing and froing of Miss Montague, that I'm oversensitive, and there she goes back again. Mrs. Grubach appeared quite powerless. Should I tell her to leave moving the rest of her things over till later, then, Mr. K? If that's what you want, I'll do it immediately. But she has to move in with Miss Bursner, said Kay. Yes, said Miss Grubach, without quite understanding what Kay meant. So she has to take her things over there. Mrs. Grubach just nodded. Kay was irritated all the more by this dumb helplessness, which, seen from the outside, could have seemed like a kind of defiance on her part. He began to walk up and down the room between the window and the door, thus depriving Mrs. Grubach of the chance to leave, which she otherwise probably would have done. Just as Kay once more reached the door, someone knocked at it. It was the maid to say that Miss Montague would like to have a few words with Mr. Kay, and therefore requested that he come to the dining room, where she was waiting for him. Kay heard the maid out thoughtfully, and then looked back at the shocked Mrs. Gruber in a way that was almost contemptuous. His look seemed to be saying that Kay had been expecting his invitation for Miss Montague for a long time, and that it was confirmation of the suffering he had been made to endure that Sunday morning from Mrs. Grubach's tenants. He sent the maid back with the reply that he was on his way. Then he went to the wardrobe to change his coat, and in answer to Mrs. Grubach gently whining about the nuisance Miss Montague was causing, merely asked her to clear away the breakfast things. "But you've hardly touched it," said Mrs. Grubach. "Oh, just take it away," shouted Kay. It seemed to him that Miss Montague was mixed up in everything, and made it repulsive to him. As he went through the hallway, he looked at the closed door of Miss Bursner's room, but it wasn't there that he was invited, but the dining room, to which he yanked the door open without knocking. The room was long, but narrow, with one window. There was only enough space available to put two cupboards at an angle in the corner by the door, and the rest of the room was entirely taken up with the long dining table, which started the door and reached all the way to the great window, which was thus made almost inaccessible. The table already laid for a large number of people, as on Sundays almost all the tenants ate their dinner here at midday. When Kate entered, Miss Montague came towards him from the window along one side of the table. They greeted each other in silence. Then Miss Montague, her head unusually erect as always, said, "I'm not sure whether you know me." Kay looked at her with a frown. "Of course I do," he said. "You've been living here with Mrs. Grubach for quite some time now, but I get the impression you don't pay much attention to what's going on in the lodging house," said Miss Montage. "No," said Kay. "Would you not like to sit down?" said Miss Montage. In silence the two of them drew chairs out from the farthest end of the table and sat down facing each other. But Miss Montage stood straight up again, as she had left her handbag on the window sill, and went to fetch it. She shuffled down the whole length of the room. When she came back, the handbag lightly swinging, she said, "I'd like just to have a few words with you on behalf of my friend. She would have come herself, but she's feeling a little unwell today. Perhaps you'll be kind enough to give her and listen to me instead. There's anyway nothing that she could have said that I won't. On the contrary, in fact, I think I can say even more than her because I'm relatively impartial. Would you not agree?" "What is there to say, then?" asked Kay, who was tired of Miss Montage continuously watching his lips. In that way she took control of what he wanted to say before he said it. "Miss Bursner clearly refuses to grant me the personal meeting that I asked her for." "That's how it is. Or rather, that's not at all how it is. The way you put it is remarkably severe," said Miss Montage. "Generally speaking, meetings are neither granted nor opposite. But it can be that the meetings are considered unnecessary, and that's how it is here. Now, after your comment, I can speak openly. You asked my friend verbally or in writing for the chance to speak with her. Now my friend is aware of your reasons for asking for this meeting, or at least I suppose she is, as so, for reasons I know nothing about, she is quite sure that it would be of no benefit to anyone if this meeting actually took place. Moreover, it was only yesterday, and only very briefly, that she made it clear to me that such a meeting could be of no benefit for yourself either. She feels that it can only have been a matter of chance that such an idea came to you, and that even without any explanations from her, you will very soon come to realize it yourself, if you have not done so already, the futility of your idea. My answer to that is that although it may be quite right, I consider it advantageous, if the matter is to be made perfectly clear. To give you an explicit answer, I offered my service in taking on the task. After some hesitation, my friend conceded. I hope, however, also to have acted in your interest, as even the slightest uncertainty in the least significant of matters will always remain a cause of suffering, and if, as in this case, it can be removed without substantial effort, then it is better if that is done without delay." "I thank you," said Kay, as soon as Miss Montrose had finished. He stood slowly up, looked at her, then across the table, then out the window. The house opposite stood there in the sun, and went to the door. Miss Montage followed him a few paces, as if she did not quite trust him. At the door, however, both of them had to step back, as it opened and Captain Lance entered. This was the first time that Kay had seen him up close. He was a large man of about 40, with a tanned, fleshy face. He bowed slightly, intending it also for Kay, and then went over to Miss Montage and deferentially kissed her hand. He was very elegant in the way he moved. The courtesy he showed towards Miss Montage made a striking contrast with the way she had been treated by Kay. None the less, Miss Montage did not seem to be cross with Kay, as it even seemed to him that she wanted to introduce the captain. Kay, however, did not want to be introduced. He would not have been able to show any sort of friendliness either to Miss Montage or to the captain. The kiss on the hand had, for Kay, bound them into a group, which would keep him at a distance from Miss Bursner, whilst at the same time seeming to be totally harmless and unselfish. Kay thought, however, that he saw more than that. He thought he also saw that Miss Montage had chosen a meaning of doing it that was good, but two-edged. She exaggerated the importance of the relationship between Kay and Miss Bursner, and above all, she exaggerated the importance of asking to speak with her, and she tried at the same time to make out that Kay was exaggerating everything. She would be disappointed. Kay did not want to exaggerate anything. He was aware that Miss Bursner was a little typist who would not offer him with much resistance for long. In doing so, he deliberately took no account of what Miss Grubach had told him about Miss Bursner. All these things were going through his mind as he left the room with hardly a polite word. He wanted to go straight to his room, but a little laugh from Miss Montage that he heard from the dining room behind him brought him to the idea that he might prepare a surprise for the two of them, the captain and Miss Montage. He looked round and listened to find out if there might be any disturbances from any of the surrounding rooms. Everywhere was quiet. The only thing to be heard was the conversation from the dining room and Miss Grubach voice from the passage leading to the kitchen. This seemed an opportune time. Kay went to Miss Bursner's room and knocked gently. There was no sound, so he knocked again, but there was still no answer in reply. Was she asleep? Or was she just really unwell? Or was she just pretending, as she released it could only be Kay knocking so gently? Kay assumed she was pretending and knocked harder. Eventually, when the knocking brought no result, he carefully opened the door with the sense of doing something that was not only improper but also pointless. In the room there was no one. What's more, it looked hardly at all like the room Kay had known before. Against the wall there were now two beds behind one another. There were clothes piled up on three chairs near the door. A wardrobe stood open. Miss Bursner must have gone out while Miss Montague was speaking to him in the dining room. Kate was not greatly bothered by this. He had hardly expected to be able to find Miss Bursner so easily, and had made this attempt for little more reason than to spite Miss Montague. But that made it all the more embarrassing for him when, as he was closing the door again, he saw Miss Montague and the captain talking in the open doorway of the dining room. They had probably been standing there ever since Kay had opened the door. They avoided seeming to observe Kay, but chatted lightly, and followed his movements with absent-minded glances to the side, such as you make during a conversation. But these glances were heavy for Kay, and he rushed alongside the wall back into his own room. Chapter 5. The Whip Man. One evening, a few days later, Kay was walking along one of the corridors that separated his office from the main stairway. He was nearly the last one to leave from home that evening. There remained only a couple of workers in the light of a single bulb in the dispatch department, when he heard a sign from behind a door which he had himself never opened, but which he had always thought just led into a junk room. He stood in amazement and listened again to establish whether he might not be mistaken. For a while there was silence, but then came some more sighs. His first thought was to fetch one of the servitors. It might well have been worth having a witness present, but then he was taken by an uncontrollable curiosity that made him simply yank the door open. It was, as he had thought, a junk room. Old, unusable forms, empty stone ink bottles lay scattered behind the entrance. But in the cupboard, like room itself, stood three men, crouching under the low ceiling. A candle fixed on a shelf gave them light. "What are you doing here?" asked Kay, quietly but crossly, and without thinking. One of the men was clearly in charge, and attracted attention by being dressed in a kind of dark leather costume which left his neck and chest and his arms exposed. He did not answer, but the other two called out, "Mr. K, we're to be beaten because you made a complaint about us to the examining judge." And now K finally realized that it was actually the two policemen, Franz and Wilhelm, and that the third man held a cane in his hand with which to beat them. "Well," said Kay, staring at them, "I didn't make any complaint. I only said what took place in my home, and your behavior was not entirely unobjectionable after all." "Mr. K," said Wilhelm, while Franz clearly tried to shelter behind him as protection from the third man, "if you knew how badly we get paid, you wouldn't think so badly of us. I've got a family to feed, and friends here wanted to get married. You just have to get more money where you can. You can't do it just by working hard, now however hard you try. I was sorely tempted by your fine clothes. Policemen aren't allowed to do that sort of thing. Course they aren't. And it wasn't right of us, but it tradition that the clothes go to the officers. That's how it's always been. Believe me, and it's understandable too, isn't it? What can things like that mean for anyone unlucky enough to get arrested? But if he starts talking about it openly, then the punishment has to follow. I didn't know about any of this that you've been telling me, and I made no sort of request that you be punished. I sim I was simply acting on principle." "Franz," said Wilhelm, turning to the other policeman, "didn't I tell you that the gentleman didn't say he wanted us to be punished? Now you can hear for yourself. He didn't even know we'd have to be punished. Don't you let them persuade you talking like that," said the third man to Kay. "This punishment is both just and unavoidable." "Don't listen to him," said Wilhelm, interrupting himself only to quickly bring his hand to his mouth when it had received a stroke of the cane. "We're only being punished because you made a complaint against us. Nothing would have happened to us otherwise, not even if they'd found out what we'd done. Can you call that justice? Both of us, me especially, we've proved our worth as good police officers over a long period. You've got to admit yourself that as far as official work was concerned, we did the job well. Things looked good for us. We had prospects. It's quite certain that we would have been made whip men too, like this one, only he had the luck not to have anyone make a complaint about him, as you really don't get many complaints like that. Only that's all finished now, Mr. K. Our careers are at an end. We're going to have to do work now that's far inferior to police work, and besides all this, we're going to get this terrible, painful beating." "Can the cane really cause so much pain, then?" asked Kay, testing the cane that the whip man swung in front of him. "We're going to have to strip off totally naked," said Willem. "Oh, I see," said Kay, looking straight at the whip man. His skin was burned brown like a sailor's, and his face showed health and vigorous. "Is there then no possibility of sparing these two their beating?" he asked him. "No," said the whipman, shaking his head with a laugh. "Get undressed," he ordered the policeman, and to Kay he said, "You shouldn't believe everything they tell you. It's the fear of being beaten. It's already made them a bit weak in the head. This one here, for instance," he pointed at Wilhelm, "all that he told you about his career prospects. It's just ridiculous. Look at him. Look how fat he is. The first strokes of the cane will just get lost in all that fat. Do you know what it is that's made him so fat? He's in the habit every one that gets arrested by him, he eats their breakfast. Didn't eat up your breakfast? Yeah, I thought as much. But a man with a belly like that can't be made into a whip man, and never will be. And that is quite out of the question. There are whip men like that, Wilhelm insisted, who had just released the belt of this trousers. No, said the whipman, striking him such a blow with the cane on his neck that it made him wince. You shouldn't be listening to this. Just get undressed. I would make it well worth your while if you would let them go, said Kay, without looking at the whipman again, as such matters are best carried on with both pairs of eyes turned down. He pulled out his wallet. And then you'd try and put in a compliment against me too, said the whipman, and get me flogged. No, no. Now do be reasonable, said Kay. If I had wanted to get these two punished, I would not now be trying to buy their freedom, would I? I could simply close the door here behind me, go home, and see or hear nothing more of it. That's not what I'm doing. It really is of much more importance to me to let them go freely. If I had realized they would be punished, or even that they might be punished, I would have never named them in the first place, as they are not the ones I hold responsible. It's the organization that's to blame. The high officials are the ones to blame. That's how it is, shouted the policemen, who then immediately received another blow on their backs, which were by now exposed. If you had a senior judge here beneath your stick, said Kay, pressing down the cane as he spoke to stop it being raised once more, I really would do nothing to stop you. On the contrary, I would even pay you money to give you all the more strength. Yes, that's all very plausible, what you're saying there, said the whipman. Only I'm not the sort of person you can bribe. It's my job to flog people, so I flog 'em. Franz, the policeman, had been fairly quiet so far, probably in expectation of a good result from Kay's intervention, but now he stepped forward to the door, wearing just his trousers, kneeled down, hanging on to Kay's arm, and whispered, "Even if you can't get mercy shown for both of us, at least try and get me set free. Willem is older than me. He's less sensitive than me in every way. He even got a light beating a couple of years ago. But my record's still clean. I only did things the way I did because Wilhelm led me on to it. He's been my teacher, both for good and bad. Down in front of the bank, my poor bribe is waiting for me at the entrance. I'm so ashamed of myself. It's pitiful." His face was flowing over with tears, and he wiped it dry on Kay's coat. "I'm not going to wait any longer," said the whipman, taking hold of the cane in both hands and laying into Franz, while Wilhelm cowered back in a corner and looked on secretly, not even daring to turn his head. Then the sudden scream that shot out from Franz was long and irrevocable. It seemed to come not from a human being, but from an instrument that was being tortured. The whole corridor rang with it. It must have been heard by everyone in the building. "Don't shout like that," called out Kay, unable to prevent himself, and as he looked anxious in the direction from which the servitor would come, he gave Franz a shove, not hard, but hard enough for him to fall down unconscious. Clawing at the ground with his hands, by reflex, he still did not avoid being hit. The rod still found him on the floor, the tip of the rod swaying regularly up and down while he rode to and fro under its blows. And now one of the servitors appeared in the distance, and another a few steps behind him. Kay had been quickly thrown the door shut, gone over to one of the windows overlooking the yard, and opened it. The screams had completely stopped, so that the servitor wouldn't come in. He called out, "It's only me." "Good evening, chief clerk," said somebody called back. Is there anything wrong? No, no, answered Kay. It's only a dog yelping in the yard. There was no sound from the servitors, so he added, You can go back to what you were doing. He did not want to become involved with the conversation with them, and so he leant out of the window. A little while later, when he looked out into the corridor, they had already gone. Now Kay remained at the window. He did not dare go back into the junk room, and he did not want to go home either. The yard he looked down into was small and rectangular. All around it were offices. All the windows were now dark, and only those at the very top caught a reflection of the moon. Kay tried hard to see into the darkness of one corner of the yard where a few hand carts had been left behind one another. He felt anguish at not having been able to prevent the flogging, but that was not his fault. If Franz had not screamed like that, clearly it must have caused a great deal of pain, but it's important to maintain control of oneself at important moments. If Franz had not screamed, then it was at least highly probable that Kay would have been able to dissuade the whipman. If all the junior officers were contemptible, why would the whipman, whose position was the most inhumane of all, be any exception? Ask and Kay had noticed very clearly now how his eyes had lit up when he saw the banknotes. He had obviously only seemed serious about the flogging to raise the level of the bribe a little, and Kay had not been ungenerous. He really had wanted to get the policeman freed. If he really had now begun to do something against the degeneracy of the courts, then it was a matter of course that he would have to do something here as well. But of course it became impossible for him to do anything as soon as Franz started screaming. Kay could not possibly have let the junior bank staff, and perhaps even all sorts of other people, come along and catch him by surprise as he haggled with those people in the junk room. Nobody could really expect that sort of sacrifice of him. If that had been his intention, then it would almost have been easier. Kay would have been taken his own clothes off and offered himself to the whipman in the policeman's place. The whipman would certainly not have accepted this substitution anyway, as in the way he would have seriously violated his duty without gaining any benefit. He would most likely have violated his duty twice over, as court employees were probably under orders not to cause any harm to Kay while he was facing charges, although there may have been special conditions enforced there. However things stood, Kay was able to do no more than throw the door shut, even though that would still do nothing to remove all the dangers he faced. It was regrettable that he had given Franz a shove, and it could only be excused by the heat of the moment. In the distance he heard the steps of the servitors. He did not want them to be too aware of his presence, so he closed the window and walked towards the main staircase. At the door of the junk room he stopped and listened for a little while. All was silent. The two policemen were entirely at the whipman's mercy. He could have beaten them to death. Kay reached his hand out for the door handle, but drew it back suddenly. He was no longer in any position to help anyone, and the servitors would soon be back. He did, though, promise himself that he would raise the matter again with somebody and see that, as far as it was in his power, those who really were guilty, the high officials whom nobody so far dared point out to him, received their due punishment. As he went down the main stairway at the front of the bank, he looked carefully round at everyone who was passing, but there was no girl to be seen who might have been waiting for somebody, not even within some distance from the bank. Franz claimed that his bride was waiting for him was thus shown to be a lie, albeit one that was forgivable and intended only to elicit more sympathy. The policemen were still on Kay's mind all through the following day. He was unable to concentrate on his work and had to stay in his office a little longer than the previous day so that he could finish it. On the way home, as he passed by the junk room again, he opened its door as if that had been his habit. Instead of the darkness he expected, he saw everything unchanged from the previous evening and did not know how he should respond. Everything was exactly the same as he had seen it when he had opened the door the previous evening. The forms and bottles of ink just inside the doorway, the whipman with his cane, and the two policemen still undressed. The candle on the shelf and the two policemen began to wail and call out, "Mr. K!" K slammed the door immediately shut, and even thumped on it with his fist, as if that would shut it all the firmer. Almost in tears, he ran to the servitors working quietly at the copy machine. "Go and get that junk room cleared out," he shouted, and in amazement they stopped what they were doing. "It should have been done long ago. We're sinking in dirt." "They would be able to do the job the next day," Kay nodded. "It was too late in the evening to make them do it there." And then, as he had originally intended, he sat down briefly in order to keep them near him for a little longer, looked through a few of the copies to give the impression that he was checking them, and then, as he saw they would not dare leave at the same time as he, went home tired and with his mind numb. Thank you for your support